many of you would call yourself a rule follower? Anybody willing to throw a hand up? I see some smiles. Okay, look, now the hands are like, yes, I'm a rule follower. Maybe not necessarily something you broadcast, but is there anybody here who has never gotten a ticket? Okay, well, if anybody who isn't a driver yet should be raising your hand now, okay? So anybody here who has never gotten a detention in school? Oh, wow, that was way more hands than I expected. And if you're paying attention, I didn't raise my hand for either one of them. Oh, wait. So as we reflect on rule following, are you aware, which side of the street do they drive on in the UK? Are you? The left side, okay. Now, when you're in the United Kingdom, when you're in the UK, you're driving on the left side of the road, and everything is just fine because that's the way that they're supposed to do it. But what happens if you do that here in the US? Oh, that's not a good day, is it? Yeah, you are likely going to get stopped by somebody, either somebody with red and blue flashing lights or another driver who's like, you don't belong over here. But why? Why is that? Why are you getting pulled over? Why are you getting a ticket if we're driving on the left? Because that's what you do when you're in the UK. So why are we not allowed to do that here? Why is it okay there, but it's not okay here? What's the deal? Yeah, there's a law about it. So when we are there, when people are there, the law says drive on the left side. When we are here, if you're driving, you need to drive on the right side. And it's the law that dictates which side of the street is the right side of the street here. That's the difference between malum in se and malum prohibitum. Now, if you've listened to me preach for a while, you've probably heard me refer to these two Latin phrases. Malum in se is a Latin phrase that means evil in itself. So when you think of malum in se, it's something that it doesn't matter if there's a rule against it or not. Everybody just knows that's evil. It doesn't have to be listed as a law. It doesn't have to be listed as a rule. There may or may not be a law about it, but it's evil. So with or without a law against certain things like murder or spitting your gum out on the sidewalk, certain things are always evil. But then we also have malum prohibitum. This is a Latin phrase that means it's wrong because it's prohibited. There's a rule against it. The reason why it's wrong is not because it's evil in of itself, but because we've made a rule, and that's the rule that we're trying to follow. The difference between malum in se and malum prohibitum. So our rule is drive on the right. Their rule is drive on the left. Is it evil to drive on either side of the street? No, of course not. But we have a rule that helps us to maintain order and be safe and so forth. So rule followers, if you raise your hand and you're a rule follower, sometimes we'll struggle with the difference between these two concepts. What's the difference between something that's wrong because it's just wrong, or something that's wrong not because it's just wrong, but because there's a rule? And differentiating between these two ideas can be tricky for us sometimes. Like, take, for example, if you want to sell food that you have prepared at the farmer's market, then you are not allowed to do it unless you have something called a cottage license, or unless you've prepared this food in a kitchen that is, just slipped my brain here, but a commercial kitchen that has been evaluated and meets certain standards. If you don't have that college license, then if we eat that food that you have prepared, we might all die. Or maybe there's just a rule that's against it. Do you see what I'm saying? Same thing with trying to operate a business in an area that's zoned residential. It's against the rules, it's against the law to operate a business in an area if that area is zoned as only residential. No businesses allowed. Like jaywalking, think about jaywalking. Now, I'm pretty sure most of us have jaywalked at some point in our lives, and I love the fact that several of you are trying to avoid eye contact with me right now. As soon as I look at you, don't look at me. Don't list the thing that I might have done. Jaywalking, what if there's no traffic? Anywhere, there's no cars anywhere, then is jaywalking evil? Or is it just a matter of, well, there's a rule and it's there and it's going to keep us safe, it's going to help us to have order? Same thing with no parking areas. You're not allowed to park here even if it's 2 a.m. And everything around is closed and there's no human beings anywhere in sight, but you can't park here because there's a rule that says you can't park here. Now, if there wasn't a rule that said that, go ahead and park. So this is the difference between malum in se, that's evil in of itself, and malum prohibitum. It's wrong because it's prohibited. And these rules, they help us to maintain order. They protect us. The idea with jaywalking that protects us from getting hit by a car. I don't like getting hit by cars. So I'm glad that rule is there. And it helps to give us order in our society. And so some of these things, when we think about the malum in se rules, we've got laws that are against things like murder, but you don't necessarily have to give me a statute and quote what the number and letters in the statute are in order for me to know, okay, murder is not something that I should be going to do. Even if you may be wait on hold for 6 minutes or longer, then it's still not okay for me to murder. The rules, a lot of times, they make sense to us. Whether you're a rule follower or not, many of the rules in life, they make sense to us. And I think the reason why they often make sense is because we recognize that particular rule is designed for my good. That whatever the rule is, if there's a particular rule that when I'm beginning to understand it, I'm like, okay, well, it's there to protect me, it's there to help me, it's there to make things better. So, God does the same thing. When he makes rules for you and for me, then he gives us these rules for our benefit. And sometimes it's easy to recognize that sort of a thing. Like, how am I going to protect my marriage? I'm going to protect my marriage by not cheating on my spouse. And so he made a rule about that in order to benefit the people who are married. How am I going to protect life? By not murdering. That's the reason why, a reason why God gave us that particular rule. How am I going to protect trust? By not telling lies, because if I am telling lies, your trust in me is shattered, it's ruined, and it's going to take a lot of time and effort in order to get that back. But not every rule is quite so easy to sort out, is it? We got some doozies, even ones that come from God, and when you look at those kinds of rules, you wonder to yourself, why on earth did he tell the Jews that they weren't supposed to work on Saturday? What's up with that? Now, there is a very good reason for it. But some of the rules, when we look at the rules that God has given to us, don't immediately make sense. They kind of leave us scratching our head a little bit. This collection of rules have been gathered together, and we actually have these two big sections in our Bibles. The first giant section occupies about 2/3 of the Bible as a whole. We call the Old Testament or the Old Covenant. It's the same word, just two different languages. And we have the New Testament. That's like the last 1/3 of the Bible as a whole, the New Covenant. Now, in that first covenant, in the Old Covenant, that was a conditional agreement that God made with people, a conditional covenant that he made with the Jews, that if they would follow the rules, that was the condition. If they followed the rules, then he would give to them life and forgiveness and salvation. But if they did not follow the rules, then that was off the table. And that made it extremely important for them to know and to understand how to apply those rules for their covenant. If I were a Jew and wanted to survive, then I would need to know what are the rules from God and how do they apply to my life? Because if there's some rule about what to do with your cattle and you don't have cattle, then okay, that rule doesn't apply to me. But maybe it applies in some other way. I got to find out. And so thankfully, the Jews had this group of people called teachers of the law. This category of people, their whole job was to learn about the law and then to teach other people, here's what God's rules say, and here's how it applies to your life. And they got increasingly specific over time. So God would give a rule to the Jewish people, like take, for example, he would tell them, you need to tithe. Now, tithe is a word that sometimes in churches we'll toss around, but it isn't an English word. It hasn't even been translated until we say tenth or 10%. That's literally what the word means. So if you're like, I'm tithing 15%. No, you're not, because it literally means 10, okay? And God said, I want you to tithe. And then the teachers of the law would say, okay, well, we're going to make that even more specific than just your paycheck. We're going to say, when you're harvesting mint leaves out of your herb garden, then I want you to count every leaf that you pluck. And when you get to the 10th one, set it aside. And then keep going and keep counting until you get to another 10 and set it aside. And one out of every 10 of those mint leaves you were supposed to give, if you were a Jew, as an offering. And that's what the teachers of the law told them. It was very, very, very specific, way more specific than just their paycheck. Same deal with like when God talked with the Jews about who they should or shouldn't marry. He told them, you guys should only marry other Jewish people. Now, there's a reason for this, and it's not racism. The reason that God asked them to do this was because the people who were not Jewish people were worshiping other gods other than the Jewish God. And God knew that if we marry somebody who practices a false religion, if we marry somebody who worships another God or no God at all, that disconnect in our values, in our priorities, in the practice of our faith, that disconnect is going to pull us one direction or the other. And that's a very dangerous place to be. So he said, don't marry, if you're a Jewish person, he told them, don't marry non-Jewish people. But the teachers of the law took that a step further. They made it way more specific. They added on to the rule that God made, and they said, well, Jews are better than everybody else. We kind of look down our noses at all these other people, those Gentile, non-Jewish people, and that was racism. God's not racist. He made all of humanity, but the way that they were trying to apply that rule to life led to a place that really wasn't all that good or helpful to us. And they added rules that we would refer to as one of these two Latin phrases. Look again at the phrases and tell me, which one would they categorize as? The rules that the teachers of the law added onto what God said, don't do this stuff because it's evil. It's malum prohibitum. They added rules that were rules that say it's wrong because we made a rule. Not, well, it's wrong with the whole mint leaves thing because mint leaves are evil. No. They just made that a prohibition so that they would be able to have order and protection and so forth. Same deal with the Sabbath. Do you remember when God had talked with the Jewish people about what they should or shouldn't do on the Sabbath? Now, the Sabbath is a particular day of the week. It's Saturday. Technically, it's Friday night until Saturday night, from sundown on Friday until sundown on Saturday. That 24-hour time period right there for the Jews. And he said, don't work on that day. Keep that day holy. Honor the Sabbath. Keep it holy. This was his instruction. But how are we supposed to do that, the Jews thought to themselves? So the teachers of the law would come to them and they would say, when it's the Sabbath, count how many steps you take. Can you imagine, especially people with ADD or ADHD, like count how many steps you take? I can't even remember what I was doing when I walked from one room to the next. And you want me to keep track of how many steps that I took? And if they walked further than a half mile, then they were breaking the malum prohibitum rule. Not that it was evil for them to take a step, but that was the boundary that the teachers of the law gave to them. And they also said, make sure that you wear slip-on shoes. Because if you tie your shoes, they would consider that to be work. And if you were working as a Jew on that day, they called the Sabbath, that was against the rules. Can you see how they were trying to apply the rules, but maybe not necessarily always in the best way? And there's a real difference between malum and se, things that are wrong just because they're wrong, they're evil. It's evil in and of itself. To murder and do other types of, to steal, like it's just wrong to do that. Or, well, there's a rule against it, and so we don't do it because there's a rule. That's malum prohibitum. They had this confusing mixture of God's commands and then the rules that people put right with God's commands. And it got really tough to tell the difference. I mean, if there was someone you trusted, whether it's a parent or a pastor, whoever it is in your life that you trust, and they tell you you shouldn't do fill in the blank, and you really trust that person, they tell you don't do fill in the blank, whether you should actually do it or not, and you trust them, you probably start to believe, oh yeah, well then I shouldn't do fill in the blank. Why? Because the person told me to, and I trust that person. And what do they have in their lives? Teachers of the law, who they trusted to help them understand the rules and how to apply the rules as Jewish people. And remember, it was a conditional covenant. So as far as you knew, if you're a Jew, if you didn't do the things that the teachers of the law were telling you to do, your salvation was at risk. The Jews looked at that and said, my life is at risk. And so they ended up doing all of these things or trying their best to do all of these things with this confusing mixture. And they trusted their teachers and they couldn't tell the difference between the rules and what we would call traditions. Jesus sometimes referred to them as traditions. So we could call them rules. Some would even call them laws, but Jesus would refer them as traditions because they're not the same as a rule or as a command that came from God. Can you think of a time in your life? I want you to reflect for a moment. A time in your life when you got conflicting instruction from like your parents or from a boss or from teachers. Like maybe mom said, be home by 10, but dad said it's all right if you stay out until midnight. Has that ever happened? Maybe your boss said that you got to do one thing, but HR says you got to do something else. And you have these conflicting instructions from people who are in positions of authority. Maybe there's a sign where you're driving and the sign says no right turn, but the cop goes, yeah, you need to turn to the right. And the cop's pointing and motioning, telling you to go that way, but the sign says not to. Who do we listen to? When we have this conflicting information about what it is that I must do, then who is it that's right? Who am I supposed to follow here? The Jews had the same kind of confusion that you and I have experienced in a variety of different contexts in life. For them, they got differing and conflicting information about what to do or not do, about which rules were important and which rules you could just kind of like, don't worry too much about those. That sets the scene for us at this text in Luke 18. So look there with me at Luke 18, and we're going to look together starting in verse 18. So Luke 18, and we'll kind of go forward from there with this confusion that the Jews were experiencing. It begins this way in Luke 18, starting in verse 18. Once a religious leader, so that's somebody who's telling everybody who the rules are, he's trying to obey the rules himself. Once a religious leader asked Jesus this question, good teacher, what should I do to inherit eternal life? I mean, what's it going to take? That's a decent question, right? If I'm going to live, if I'm going to have forgiveness, salvation, life, especially life that's going to last, what do I need to do in order to get that? Because this person, like all the other Jews, had conflicting information about how to answer the question. And one of their teachers, one of their rabbis said one thing, then another one said something else. Who should they listen to? Which rules were the right ones, the good ones? Jesus responded in a really unexpected way in verse 19. Look there with me. Why do you call me good? It's kind of weird at first glance. Because, I mean, like, is Jesus good? Yeah, I would say he is. And I would guess that Jesus would say he is. And he's asking this person, why are you calling me, hey, good teacher? Maybe that's a part of his question. Good teacher, what rules am I supposed to do here? Why do you call me good? And so verse 19 continues. Why do you call me good? Jesus asked him. Only God is truly good. Oh, man. If you were confused a moment ago, I think this one feels even more confusing because it kind of seems like Jesus is saying either that he's not good or that he's not God. It feels really off. Why is Jesus answering in this way? Why do you call me good? Only God is the one who has the right answer to your question about which rules are the good ones. Only God is the one who has the right answer about what it is that you got to do in order to have life. Only God is in the position to do that. Why you call me good? And it's confusing. He asked why this guy called him good. He wanted this guy to think about his opinion of Jesus. Now, if you look carefully in the verses on the screen here, did Jesus say, I'm not good? Did he? No. Did he say, I'm not God? No, he didn't say either one of those things. So if you're feeling like maybe he said that, let's pay attention to what he actually said. He didn't say, I'm not good. He didn't say, I'm not God. He said, why do you call me good? Only God is truly good. Reflect on, now if I were to put it in my own words, reflect on who you actually think I am. Do you think that I am in a position to answer your question? Because this dude was surrounded by all kinds of opinions, kind of like us. We live in a world filled with various perspectives, kind of like when we go to work or when we talk with friends or neighbors, other human beings or social media. There's so many different conflicting points of view where people are saying, this is the good thing, that's the bad thing. This is what you need to do, that's what you don't need to do, or that's what you must not do. So many opposing polemic viewpoints, it's tough to figure out, well, then who it is that I'm supposed to listen to? And Jesus is saying, why do you call me the one who would be in the position to answer that kind of a question? Because really only God should be answering that kind of a question. He asked this guy why he called him good. And the next question as we apply this to our lives is, who is Jesus in your opinion? I mean, that's what you need to ask yourself. Who is Jesus in my opinion? Do I actually believe that Jesus has the authority to decide which rules are the good ones and which rules are the ones that are just the traditions that people made up? Do I believe Jesus has that place, that position of authority over me, where he dictates what's good or not good, where he is the one who says what's right or wrong or evil or good? Do I believe that he sets the rules for me? Or does somebody else? That's a very personal question, and only you can answer that question because it's about what you think of Jesus. Now, it doesn't change who he actually is, but it does make it very clear who you believe he is. And since this guy was confused about which teacher to listen to, what makes Jesus any different from any of the rest of those Jewish teachers, right? Lots of Jewish teachers, and Jesus was one of the Jewish teachers. So why would Jesus make things less confusing? Because if he just said, okay, well, do this, that feels an awful lot like just another opinion and a whole mixture of options of opinions where this person prohibits this, that person prohibits that, this rule prohibits this rule is malum prohibitum. It's confusing. In other words, does this guy believe that Jesus' rules are the good ones, the right ones, and the ones that he should listen to? His answer to that question would dictate whether or not he would do the things that Jesus told him to do. So before you even get to the answer of what are the things that I have to do, you need to ask a different question. He needed to ask a different question. Who did he believe Jesus is? Your answer to that question, who is Jesus, will dictate whether or not you obey Jesus. It's true of everyone. It's true of me and you and everyone. Who we believe him to be is going to dictate whether or not we do the things that he tells us that we must do. So Jesus added, only God is good. You called me good, and he says, only God is good. Kind of like him asking, are you calling me God? This is the question on the line for the man who came to talk with Jesus that day. It's the question on the line for you and me. Are you calling me God? And I mean, he is. Jesus is God. But the question is whether or not this guy believed it, and soon we will see. So if we believe that Jesus is who he says he is, then his commands are the good ones. If you believe Jesus is who he claims to be, then his commands are the ones that are the official rules, the right commands, the ones that we actually need to obey. But if you don't believe, if you're not quite sure, if you don't put Jesus in that highest position of authority, when you think of Jesus, and the question is, do I believe that Jesus is God? If your answer is, I'm not ready to quite say that I believe that yet, then Jesus' rules are just another opinion. You see what I'm saying? If you don't believe he is God, then that means that what Jesus says is just one of several possible options for us to choose from the list of malum prohibitum. Well, there's this rule against it, and it's prohibited. Why? Because some guy said so, and I chose to trust him, or I chose not to trust this guy because I don't think he's who he claims to be. I don't think he's God, and so who cares what rules this guy says? If you don't like those rules, no problem. No problem at all, so long as he isn't who he says he is. If he is God, If Jesus actually is the one he claims to be, then we kind of need to pay attention to him. So this guy asked Jesus about the rules, the commands. Look at verse 20. But to answer your question, Jesus said, you know the commandments. You must not commit adultery. That's sexual activity outside of marriage. You must not murder. You must not steal. You must not testify falsely. That means to lie. Honor your father and mother. Now, if these sound familiar to you, these rules that Jesus is speaking of right now, if they sound familiar to you, it's because they come from the top 10. We would often refer to them as the 10 Commandments. These are the most well-known commands out of the entire Old Covenant, out of the entire Old Testament. The most popularly known rules for Jews that apply, like they have had an influence over our entire nation, on our entire world. This list of rules is so very famous and so very well known. And those are the rules that Jesus was quoting from at this point. They've had this tremendous influence on our understanding and our application of morality, the boundaries between what is right and what is wrong, our understanding of what is good and what is evil. So when this guy asked Jesus which rules are the good ones, Jesus didn't pick his favorite teacher of the law. He didn't choose his favorite local rabbi. Who's he quoting? God. Jesus is quoting God. Rules that God gave in the Old Testament. They're not a matter of opinion. They're not a matter of, well, it's wrong because there's a prohibition against it. It's from the source of morality. It doesn't really matter whether you agree with it or not. If it comes from the source of morality, then it's accurate. Good is good, evil is evil. And we can't really debate that if it comes from the very source. So after having listened to Jesus' quote from these top 10 rules, verse 21, the man replied, look there with me, verse 21, I've obeyed all these commands since I was young. Now, that's quite a claim, isn't it? I've obeyed all these commands, all the rules. It's like he was saying, I am a rule follower. I have never gotten a ticket. I have never gotten a detention. I have never been convicted of a crime. My record is clean, and I am innocent. Can you say the same thing? I can't. I can't say, well, when I think about the rules that are the official rules that came straight from the source of morality, the rules that came straight from God, I can't say, oh yeah, I've always obeyed every single one of those rules perfectly ever since I was young. I can't say that. Verse 22. When Jesus heard his answer, he said, there's still one thing you haven't done. Well, this feels important. There's still one thing you haven't done. He said, sell all your possessions, give the money to the poor, and you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come, follow me. That's a command that comes from God. This was the most important rule. Follow Jesus. Now, I think the frustrating thing about that is there's a whole lot of stuff that gets in the way of us following Jesus. All kinds of things that kind of creep in and press their way in that get in the way of us surrendering our lives to him completely. They get in the way of us doing all of the things that he asks for us to do. All kinds of things that get in the way. For this rich guy, the thing that stood in the way of him living in total surrender to God was his money. That was what was in the way for him. If you don't have money, that's not what's in the way for you, okay? But there are things that do get in the way for you and for me. For other people, sometimes it's power and control. We want to remain in charge of our own lives. I like being the boss of me. I don't want somebody telling me what to do. It doesn't matter if the person's in authority or not. I want to do it my way. And so what's in my way is, if this is true, what's in the way is power and control. That's how it is for some people. For other people, it's pride and ego. We're reluctant to admit our dependence on God. We're reluctant to recognize our need for his grace. Why? Because, I'm a very accomplished person, aren't I? And we look at ourselves and you think, okay, well, I should be proud. Maybe this is what's getting in the way for you. Maybe it's ego. Maybe it's pride. For other people, it's relationships. And these relationships, like family or friends or maybe even a romantic relationship, they become more important to some of us, more important than God. And that can get in the way. If you've ever been in a relationship where that person became more important to you than God, that's a real danger, a real red flag that should get thrown on the field, and you need to hit that pause button very, very quickly. Because that person cannot take the place of God, because they're not God. They're not the source of good or evil, of right or wrong, of morality. For some people, it's comfort or it's habits. For some others, it's addictions, or maybe it's approval from others. We just really want other people to be happy with us. It could be distractions or bitterness or doubt or anything else that stands in the way of me giving myself in total surrender to Jesus Christ as my Lord, as my God, as the highest authority over my life. Whatever it is that gets in the way, that's the thing. That is the thing that Jesus is asking you to get rid of in your life? Sell it, get rid of it, don't go back there, end it, whatever it looks like, get rid of it, whatever it is that's in the way. And I have a feeling, if we're honest with ourselves, if we'll pause for a moment and think about, is there something that's in the way of me giving myself in complete surrender to Jesus? If you'll honestly reflect on that, I'm confident you'll see something. Even if you've been following Jesus for a long time. Or maybe you're not following him yet, and you're still trying to figure that out. Like, maybe I will follow him, maybe I'll commit to him, maybe I'll surrender to him, maybe not, I'm not sure yet. And regardless of what position you're in, if you ask this question, God will show you something, and then that's the thing. That's the thing that you need to get rid of, so that you can obey that command where he said, then come, follow me. Verse 23, when the man heard this, he became very sad. The parallel text in Matthew 19 reads, he went away sad, for he was very rich. Now, the whole going away part, Luke didn't write that one down. Matthew did, when the Holy Spirit inspired him to make this record of what had happened, and Matthew jots down, the guy went away. What was the one thing Jesus asked him to do? Come, follow me. How am I going to follow you? By getting rid of whatever stands in the way. What stood in the way for him? His money, his stuff, his possessions, right? Come, follow me. Going away is the opposite of following him. We're kind of like at a fork in the road spiritually, where we're going to have to decide, am I going to get rid of whatever it is that stands in the way and follow Jesus, or am I going to go away sad because whatever it is that stood in the way is more important to me, it's more valuable to me, and you got to make a choice about that. For him, all of his stuff, his wealth, his riches, his possessions, they were too important to him, and he wouldn't let go. He wouldn't trade that for something infinitely better. He wasn't willing to let go of it, even though if he did let go of it, what he would have gotten instead would have been worth so much more. If you are anything like me, and you don't understand a rule, then you ask a question. What question do you ask? Why? Right? Any parent of a toddler has heard this question, this incessant question, more times than we can count. It'll drive parents nuts. I'm so glad my children aren't at that age at this point. They'll still ask why. We still ask why as adults. But they're asking over and over and over again because they don't understand the rule. Why do I have to go to bed? Why is it that I can't eat dessert before I eat the rest of my meal? Why do I need to limit my screen time, Mom? Why is it that I have to put on my jacket or my coat before I go outside? Parents understand the answer to the question, why? And sometimes we learn to understand why. The rules are the rules. Why do we have to go to bed? Because we need rest. Why is it that we shouldn't be shoving dessert down our throats before we eat our meals? Because we need nutrition, and you don't want to take up all that space with a pie that's tasty. Why is it that we should limit our screen time? Because you don't want brain rot, my son. You don't want brain rot, daughter. And why is it that you need to put on a coat or jacket? So you don't stink and freeze to death. Because if you could see your breath, then your boogers are probably freezing inside of your nostrils, and you need a coat before you go outside. We learn to understand why, but not always. A lot of times we learn why, but not always. And I believe that there's a better question than why. If you don't understand the rule, if you don't understand why, there's a much better question that we should be asking instead. In fact, it's the question that Jesus directed this guy to begin asking. It's the question, who? Not why, but who? So we look back at verse 19, the beginning of their conversation. We've already looked at this before. And when Jesus started interacting with this guy here in verse 19, he says, why do you call me good? That's a who question. Who am I? Who am I in your life? Who is Jesus to you? In your opinion, does Jesus have the highest authority? In other words, is he your Lord, your king, your boss, your master? Who is he to you? He's the one who loves you more than anyone ever could. He's the one who wants the absolute best for you. He's the one who stops us from running out in front of the traffic of our sin. He's the one who protects us. I used to view God totally different from that, though. I used to look at God as being like the cop who would pull me over and arrest me. I used to look at God and think, oh, he's like the judge who would condemn me, or he's like the warden who would imprison me and punish me. And when I viewed it that way, morality was a threat. If I didn't do the things that I needed to do, it was threatening to me. But so long as I did the good things, then I'd be okay. Well, when I looked at morality as a threat, then I also looked at the source of morality as a threat. I looked at the rule maker and felt like he was against me, either trying to spoil all my fun or trying to catch me and get me. And when I saw it through that lens, it just made my temptation stronger. Kind of like when you see that sign that says, keep off the grass or no trail. You know what you feel when you see one of those signs, when you're out hiking around and the little sign reads no trail. That's exactly where you want to go. Why? Because there's a sign that tells you not to. I know those feelings. I believed the lies of our spiritual enemy who seeks to deceive us into believing that our sin is desirable. He lies to us, hiding the death that is inside of every temptation. I fought against my temptation, and I made promises to God. I would say, oh, God, I promise to you, and then I'd break my promise. And, oh, God, I promise even stronger, and then I'd break my promise. And, oh, God, I swear to you, and then I would break what I swore. And, oh, God, I make an oath with you, because maybe that's like somehow stronger, and then I would break my oath. And I tried so very hard, and I even asked others to hold me accountable, but I still failed. Have you ever felt that way about the rules? I tried so stinking hard, but I still failed because I didn't understand morality. Morality is a gift from God. That's the one thing I want to send home with you today. I want you to write this in your heart. I want you to memorize this and apply it to your life. Morality is a gift from God. If you don't believe that, it means that our spiritual enemy has convinced you that sin is desirable. That's a lie. It's not desirable. It's death in disguise. Morality is a gift from God. It's a blessing. It's designed to protect you and me. Morality exists for our benefit so that we can enjoy the very best life. And the reason I'm telling you this is because of the importance of our approach to morality. If we avoid our sin because we see it as malum prohibitum, because it's prohibited, we are unlikely to be free from it. We'll keep falling into temptation and falling into sin. The benefit of seeing morality as a gift is that we shift from being a rule follower to having a heart transformation. Instead of being in love with the sin that kills us, we fall in love with the author of life. We see morality as protective instead of restrictive. We see it that it takes away our need to fight against it, and we enjoy freedom from sin instead of guilt and frustration. Would you like to be free from your deepest shame? When you think about the thing that you're most embarrassed about in life, the thing that you try to keep secret, the thing that you're the least proud of, that you wish had never happened, wouldn't you like to be free from that? This gift from God, morality, helps us to value what is good and the path to the fullness of life instead of seeing morality as a burden that spoils our fun. That is the gift of morality. That is why it is so important for us to change the way that we think about morality. If you learn how to do this, you will see habitual sin end. You will see freedom from that thing that has held its grip on you for so long. You'll see the pain of sin that becomes a thing of the past, and you'll live up to the full potential of God's will for your life because morality is a gift from God.